Good morning, everyone. Let me just turn this on. It's lovely to see you all again this morning. Can I just remind you of a couple of things? First of all, we've reduced the number of sessions to 8. We think that you'll probably get tired by 8, and that's probably as much as we can expect of any of us. So we've done that, and we've taken out the half-term break because we thought that probably none of us were affected by the half-term break. I hope that's accurate, but we've taken it out, so we go straight through each week until we reach session 8. The other thing this morning, I'm going to now introduce our teacher this morning is Jan Barker, who's going to take us through chapters 1 and 2. And this is because Christine and I formed a group a couple of years ago from among you at our invitation that a number of you would come and we would go through biblical books together, not with us doing the teaching, but with you doing the teaching. So we've had 8 of us, and over a few years, we've gone through a number of books in the Old Testament and the New, and so it's been a great delight this time that we are able to step back and relax and enjoy the teaching that we're going to receive from the members of the group. I would like to form another such group from among you, and the only requirement of membership of such a group, we meet whenever we can. We try and meet as regularly as possible, but sometimes there are gaps for various reasons. The only requirement is that you are willing to do the work. So I provide, the parish actually has been very generous in providing commentaries and studies, and you are willing to do the work for your section, and then you present a paper to the group and teach the group, and then we discuss it and so on. I would perhaps be delighted if by the end of this course we could get another 6 or 7. One needs about 6 people to have a viable group. Would be willing to form a new group and to do the same thing, so that my idea is that we expand the range of people who are able to do serious Bible study in the parish. And as I said last time, we need this badly, because in today's rush climate, we get 10-minute sermons which, as John Stott famously said, only make Christianettes. Sermonettes make Christianettes. So we do need substantial biblical teaching if we're really going to claim to be the people of the book. And that's why these studies are really important. So I hope some of you will take your fearfulness into account, but overcome it and agree to do this, because it's been a great delight. It really has been a wonderful experience. And originally, the group, my idea was just that we would meet for the one book, but people so enjoyed it that we've gone on and on and on, and have become a more or less permanent group now, studying different books, and it's been a wonderful delight. So you have the 8 weeks to make up your minds as to whether you're willing to share in that, and I hope that some of you would like to do that. But now, Jan is going to take us through chapters 1 and 2. Remember the procedure. People who are sharing in this at home are encouraged to send questions or comments that they would like to make to Nico on chat, and he will then relay them to us at the end. But Jan won't mind, as I don't, that during the course of her talk, if you want to say something, add something, question something, make a comment, ask a question, that you do so. I'll repeat it out loud so that people who are listening in at home can hear it. Okay, so that's the way we work. So let's open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity again to engage with this amazing and mysterious book. We just pray for Jan that you would bless her in all the work that she has done to prepare for today as she delivers this talk to us, that we may begin to enter deeply into the mysteries of the book of Job. And so we offer ourselves to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Jan, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to say, as Tim said about the group, I found it tremendously helpful and enjoyable. It's really been a fantastic group, and I've been particularly happy with it until this moment. Anyway, yes, we're doing chapters 1 and 2, and normally, I don't think it's probably possible because of the streaming as well, I would ask different people to read different parts of it, but I think probably I'll have to do the reading, won't I?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So it's Job chapter 1 and 2. Just before we read any of it, just a little bit of background. This is in prose, and so is the epilogue in prose, as Tim has said, and then all the dialogue between Job and his friends is in poetry, and which is a very interesting combination. The setting of the story of Job is the pre-patriarchal world, more than 1,000 years before the author, and outside ancient Israel, a world uncluttered, you might say, by later Israelite traditions. And so no reference is made to Job's righteousness being linked to how well he kept the Torah, the commandments given to Moses, and forming the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. The portrayal of Job as a hero of the pre-patriarchal world, 2000 to 1800 BC. It's interesting that although in the scenes of the heavenly court, God is referred to as, well, with the initials YHWH, Yahweh, the Israelite covenant name for God, but in all the poetic dialogues that follow, pre-Moses names are used, like El Shaddai, Elohim, Eloah. There's one exception in chapter 12 where Yahweh, Lord, is used. Although the setting is outside Israel, the book is written for Jews, for the Israelites. Let's turn then to the Bible. I'll read through the whole part of it, and then we'll go back on pick out the verses. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their hot birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going to and fro on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were ploughing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabians attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the eldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going to and fro on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." "Skin for skin," Satan replied. "A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, then he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was. Excuse me. It was good to read the whole part of it, because it does, I think, when you hear it like that, give the idea that it's similar to a fairy story. It's got certain sort of conventions about it. The repetition of the messengers coming, the repetition of what God says to Satan and his reply. So it sets us up for this, what might seem as, a fairly straightforward and obvious type of fairy tale or story. But in fact, there's a lot of significance in virtually every part of it. In the land of Uz is significant because it's outside Israel. A possible suggestion for placing Uz is that of Kirbet, which is 55 miles south-southeast of the Dead Sea, in the large territory east of the River Jordan, which included Edom to the south. The territory of Edom is significant because of the association with the Aramean brand of Abraham's family. Milcah is also a mother. She has borne your sons to your brother Nahor, Uz the firstborn. Genesis 22:20. Further, in Genesis 36:28, we read, the sons of Dishan, Uz and Aran, and the Aramean lands to the north, see Genesis chapter 10, verse 23, the sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, etc. So the names of Job's companions and their nationality sound like a corruption of Edomite names: Eliphaz and his son Teman, Bildad may be a descendant of Shua, the youngest son of Abraham, and Keturah. Zepho expanded into Zophar. And lastly, later on in the same chapter of Genesis, a case could be made for Job's name being derived from Jobab, an ancient king of Edom, Genesis 36:33. Another suggestion for the background of Job's name is that the Hebrew, I don't know really how to pronounce this, I-Y-Y-O-V, Yov, evolved from an earlier form of Ayabu, meaning, where is the Father? That is God. The Transjordan city of Shatarot was governed by a man named Ayabu in the 14th century BC, and it's possible that he, or someone like him, might have been the hero of a Canaanite legend from which the Bible story grew. As Tim said, this opening gives a fairy tale beginning, once upon a time. And the Jewish Study Bible puts forward the case that Job represents the model literary case of an innocent sufferer afflicted by the deity through no fault of his own and forever kept in the dark concerning the actual cause of his misery. To take the bit of Job then, there lived a man. The atypical Hebrew word suggests that this is a representative, universal man, a hero who is presented as blameless, upright, fearing God, turned away from evil. The phrase fear of God is a conventional phrase equivalent to true religion. Fear in this phrase has the sense of reverential trust in God that includes commitment to God's revealed will. So this description does not mean totally sinless. It's referring to the reverence that the holder has for God. In the Bible, the description is followed by an account of his wealth. Perhaps this juxtaposing of the two hints at blessing as a reward for uprightness. The description of Job's possessions is related to symbolic numbers. Firstly, all are whole numbers, representing wholeness. And they add up to tens: 7 daughters and 3 sons, 7,000 sheep and 3,000 cattle, 500 oxen and 500 donkeys. And it's interesting, the Hebrew word for donkeys is feminine in form, so they were even more valuable because they would produce young. The number 7 also represents completeness. God, having completed creation, rested on the 7th day. Together with many servants, Job is obviously a wealthy man. If we look at verse 4, his sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. It was the custom of his sons to hold feast, each on his own day, as it says in the Jewish Bible, that is his birthday. The feasting of the brothers and sisters suggests a happy and harmonious family, with Job as the conscientious head of the family, undertaking a priestly role of sacrifices to ensure his whole family is right with God. The sending of messengers, verse 5, anticipates the later tragic messengers who come with their horrific news of destruction. And in verse 5, Job says, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their thoughts." The term for cursed, blasphemed, is curious actually, because it is bless, and bless is used here and elsewhere in the narrative as a euphemism for cursing, which seems strange that they could have either meaning when they're so opposite in their meaning. By using the euphemism, the narrator mirrors Job's cautious use of language with respect to God. We then get a complete scene change, the courts of heaven. The scene changes in the whole book of Job are very dramatic and keep, well, at least in the prologue and the epilogue, keep switching. So you have, in fact, again, 7 scenes. Scene 1 is on earth, chapter 1, 1 to 5. Scene 2 is heaven, chapter 1, 6 to 12. Scene 3, back to earth again, chapter 1, 13 to 19. Scene 4, 20 to 22, earth. Scene 5, 1 to 6, heaven, and 2, 7 to 10, earth. And lastly, 7, chapter 2, 11 to 13, earth. So it keeps switching, and this sort of builds up, in a sense, dramatic tension. And further, because we have those different scenes, we, the reader, and of course God and Satan, know everything that goes on. But poor Job, the victim, has no knowledge of the conversations between God and Satan. The phrase, the patience of Job, is often used, although various scholars sort of question that. It suggests a simplistic assessment of Job's characters. But in fact, as we go on reading here, and the Satan implies, a much more complex one. In other words, does Job really fear God for nothing? Is he getting nothing out of it? And that's Satan's argument, that yes, it's all right, everything is good for Job. Look what you've given him, look how you've blessed him. He's really just worshipping you for what he's got out of it. And that, in a way, is what prompts God to say, OK, you can prove it if you like, have a go. Chapter 1, verses 6 to 12, is the first heavenly court scene. The so-called angels come to present themselves. In the Hebrew, this actually reads as the sons of God. The heavenly court scene is actually reminiscent of a scene in the Old Testament, 1 Kings 22, 19 to 22. I'll read it to you. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the hosts of heaven standing round him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth, Gilead, and go to his death there? Finally, a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord, and said, I will entice him. So that sets a scene, and even the words entice are used again in Job. It's interesting, in the book of Job, the accuser, obstructor, the opposer, is actually written as Satan, and the bit is a definite article. So it's not Satan as we now think of him as a sort of personality with a capital S, but it's the Satan. So he's acting as the accuser.
Can I just make a comment, Jen?
Sorry, yeah.
This is a very interesting example of the way translation is already interpretation. The fact that you read in your Bibles simply Satan with a capital S is imposing a much later concept of Satan, which comes very much later after the exile, when Israel has been deeply influenced by Persian religion, which was based on essentially on opposites, the idea of an evil power versus a good power. And that came back into Israelite religion after the exile. And it was out of that the notion of Satan that was developed, and particularly in the New Testament, when the Greek translated diabolos, which means devil. And so Satan became the devil in the New Testament for Christians. But there's no such concept in the Old Testament. There's only a single text in Chronicles, First Chronicles in the Old Testament, which has Satan without the Satan, without the article. Otherwise, it always is this function, the Satan, the Satan. So I just wanted to underline that what you're reading in your Bibles is the imposition of a much later understanding, which seems to present Satan as a devilish power, but he's not that at all in the text. He's a functionary whose job, as Jan has said, is to be the adversary, like a prosecutor, to pose awkward questions to God. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Tim has explained the next bit. In a sense, we might think, well, why is he among the heavenly body? But if he's got a function there, then that sort of part way answers it. It's been suggested too that it's unusual that God asks him where he's come from. God presumably would know where he's come from, but he's really initiating a conversation. And another interesting aspect is the way Satan replies. It's in no way deferential to God. No, my Lord, but plain you. And these are sort of signals of a possible conflict between the domains of heaven and earth, or between the Satan wanting to test and bring about evil things, and God obviously being the person who stands for good.
Could I make another comment there? The heavenly council, are you going to say more about the heavenly council?
No.
Okay, the whole idea of a heavenly council is a very common one, and it comes out of the fact that although we think of ourselves as monotheists, Jews as well as Christians, there are, in the Bible, monotheism is deeply entangled with polytheism. And so the idea of this heavenly host, or the sons of God, or angels, as the NIV translation is, all these terms elide in describing beings who share the governance of the world with God in some way or another, with Yahweh in one way or another. And so quite late, you still, in fact, one of the central struggles in the Bible is the struggle between a true and absolute monotheism and the remains of a polytheism. And that, for example, in the little bit that Jan quoted from 1 Kings with Ahab, that was the struggle that was going on in Ahab's reign, because Ahab ruled over Canaanites as well as Israelites, and he, according to the book of Kings, he took the side of the Canaanites and imported their religion, or allowed their religion to flourish, setting up a profound struggle between Baalite religion, which was focused in polytheism, and the monotheism of Yahwism. So the two got deeply entangled. And even today, in sections of Christianity, in all the talk of angels and the power of angels we attribute, angels in the Bible are often indistinguishable from God. And so there's always this tussle between polytheism and a true and absolute monotheism in the Bible. And so you get often these descriptions of God and the heavenly host, which is gathered around him.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. The question is about the Hebrew Mashiach, or Mashiach, the Messiah, and as to whether the definite article there indicates a functionary. Not necessarily, but at any rate we should understand that there's no single conception of the Messiah in the Old Testament. So the idea that everybody was waiting for a particular person is quite incorrect. There were all sorts of Jews expected a Messiah, but they had no clue who the Messiah was, and there were different and competing versions in answer to that question. And when Jesus arrived, the fact that he was called the Messiah added to the interpretations of Messiah, which is in the Bible. Okay. So there's no single notion of the Messiah in the Bible at all. So it always named a person, okay, but nobody really knew. There were different ideas about who the person was. Was he the servant of second Isaiah, humble and self-sacrificing? Was he a powerful warrior who would come and sweep aside all Israel's opponents and conquerors? There were lots of different conceptions, but it was a person that they thought of. Okay.
Verse 8, have you considered my servant Job? There is something quite affectionate about the way God says, my servant Job. And he almost seems to be boasting about Job. As soon as God says this, everyone becomes a voyeur. God is watching Jacob. The Satan is watching Job. Sorry, God is watching Job. The Satan is watching Job. We are watching them watching Job. We all know more about Job than he knows himself. In the manner of a verbal fencing match, the verbal battle continues, and this is the catalyst which sets all the developments in motion. The Satan retaliates by sowing seeds of doubt. You, again, in no way deferential to God, but rather accusatory. You have protected Job so much and blessed him with health, wealth, and family. No wonder that he fears and praises you. He is raising questions about God's motives and how he rules. The accuser says, A, Job has an ulterior motive in fearing God to retain all his wealth and prosperity. B, Job does not deserve the blessings, therefore God is not ruling the world with justice. So if Job has a sort of underlying different motive for praising God, and God accepts this, then firstly, Job doesn't deserve the blessings, and secondly, God is not ruling the world with justice. He's pandering to a person who will worship him. And Satan's third point is that he wants to gain permission to test Job by removing all his protection. So it's almost as if God is forced into a corner and says, okay, go ahead, do what you want, but don't hurt Job himself. The fact that Job is totally unaware of this sets up the dramatic irony where the readers have access to crucial information which is withheld from the characters in the story. If we move on to verse 13 to 19.
Can I just comment on that? Of course, you're quite right there. This is an enormously important feature of storytelling, that we readers always have access to information that the characters themselves don't. It's like watching a crime thriller when you can see that the crook is just around the corner and the policeman doesn't know. And the tension is set up because you know the danger is right there, but the policeman doesn't know that the danger is right there. And so the intention is heightened and increased. Okay, thanks, Joe. So in verses 13 to 19, we get all the terrible, tragic accidents, as it were, that happened to Job's family. And it's interesting, too, that the repetitions here of the messenger came to Job, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. That's, again, a very important part of sort of storytelling, that you get the same thing. Red Riding Hood, what big teeth you have, what big eyes you have, Grandmama, all the better too. And the repetition sort of builds up the dramatic tension. Job's world is shattered so quickly, one after the other, that there's no time for him to adjust before the next one happens. They are a pattern, too, of disasters. So I would say there's sort of 4 lots. They happen in 4 lots. And it alternates, too, in these between sort of human instigation, if you like, and supernatural. So for the first one, we have the Sabians, who are probably South Arabians from Sheba, travelling merchants from Timar, about 350 miles southeast of Jerusalem. So the Sabians come, and Job loses 1,000 oxen, 1,000 donkeys. The supernatural, which is the lightning, is the next one, resulting in the loss of 7,000 sheep. The next one reverts back to human, the Chaldeans, 3,000 camels. And the last one, which you could say supernatural, it's the wind, is the sons and daughters. And it builds up too, so that you have the more valuable and precious things coming later. So it really sort of builds up, how can this be happening? And one thing after another, literally, for Job. And yet, when we get to verse 20 to 22, Job recognizes all of this as God at work, and he falls down in worship of him. And significantly, he uses the word Yahweh
a recognition of the overall greatness of God. And that's important too, because although this is set outside Israel, it's being written for the Israelite people. And yet the hero is not a Jew, it's a non-Jewish hero. And yet it's written so that the Jewish people will understand, and it's written for them. It's interesting, the use of the word naked as a reminder. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall depart. We actually use a slightly different adaptation, but we use that in the funeral service. We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And we use those words still today. And it says, in summing up, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing, but rather blessed God. Yes, in some versions it says Job said. So one might say, well, that doesn't tell us what he was thinking. But in fact, his actions, he blesses God. Then we switch again to the second heavenly court scene, which is modelled on the first court scene, with much repetition, again thinking of the sort of folk tale, telling the story, the repetition of what went before. So verses 1 to 2 are repeated in 6 to 7. But God's question to the Satan, where have you come from? That remains the same. But whereas previously it had just initiated the conversation with the Satan, now it invites the Satan to admit failure. He tested Job, he made all these calamities happen, but Job hasn't changed his attitude to God. So God refers directly to Job and Job's righteousness, in a sense saying, well, look, I won this. He holds fast to his integrity, although, it's interesting, although you incited me against him without reason. Of course, in our minds, this raises the question, can or should God be able to incite? And if he is able to be incited, then doesn't that make him vulnerable? Is God vulnerable in some way? Because he can be egged on, he can be influenced. Satan's line is that the test was not severe enough. Skin for skin, a difficult phrase. Some people have suggested the meaning is that there are sort of two layers of skin, and at the moment the first layer only has been penetrated. But Satan suggested it needs to go further. And so the exchange must be equal. That is, his health must be touched and weakened. Arabic literature has the idea of two layers of skin, and therefore it's necessary to dig deeper into Job. If God were to touch his skin, second skin, his life, then Job would curse Yahweh. God is incited again and gives permission to the Satan, but still commands him to spare Job's actual life. Verse 7 to 10, Job is afflicted from head to toe, we would say, from the soles of his feet, top of his head, from head to toe. And the list of symptoms is pretty excruciating, really. Painful festering sores all over the body, and in some, later on in some versions too, it says, and worms, nightmares, scabs that peel and become black, and the references are all there, disfigurement and revolting appearance, bad breath, excessive thinness, fever, pain night and day. So it's a horrible list. So Job sits in the rubbish dump outside the town among the burning ashes and carcasses, and worse. And of course the ashes are symbolic of mourning, a very important aspect. I mean, we even today have the symbol of ashes on Ash Wednesday. We then get to the only appearance of Job's wife. As Tim told us last time, the character of the wife has been much written about and expanded on. Augustine and Calvin portrayed her as the devil's assistant. It's interesting that it's moved people's thoughts about Job's wife, because there's so little written about her here, have let perhaps their imagination run away with them, or wanted to find out, or wanted to fill in the picture of Job's wife. And of course, if you stop to think about it, she was equally, or maybe she didn't have the personal afflictions of the pain and the sores, but as far as losing all her children and losing all their livelihood, she would be suffering as much as Job. But there's no indication of any pity or sympathy for her. But this is a patriarchal story. Job's wife is unimportant, except for one thing that she says here. And it's interesting how this is taken. Her appearance here intensifies the drama and transfers the conflict from a heavenly to an earthly context. So in a sense, she is, again, testing Job, as is suggested. Rather than come and comfort Job, she mocks him for holding on to his integrity and tells him to curse God and die. But Samuel Ballantyne, in his book, Have You Considered My Servant Job?, states that there are some grounds for questioning this normal translation, because the Hebrew text is more complex. But for centuries, people have just enlarged on that translation, and in the medieval Christianity, certainly, took Job's wife more and more to be a character of tempting, and a bit like Eve. It was obviously always the woman's fault. Now, firstly, about the Hebrew text. Firstly, there's no question mark in the Hebrew text, so it could be a statement rather than a question, an assertion, and you still persist in your integrity, not questioning him on that. She is using almost the same words as God to express unwavering confidence in Job's ability to withstand any assault. God, he still persists in his integrity. So it's saying that it could be read as a statement, just as God's was. He still persists in his integrity. So a literal reading could be that Job's wife has watched him withstand every temptation to compromise, and so she, like God, affirms him to be truly a righteous person she knows him to be. Secondly, the words curse God and die are curiously ambiguous. The part of the verb in Hebrew reads bless, barak, I don't know how you pronounce it, God and die. The prologue and the epilogue contain 7 occurrences of this word, barak. 3 are routinely translated with the normal meaning bless, and 4, including this statement by Job's wife, are widely read as euphemisms for curse. It seems the most extraordinary thing that you can have these absolute opposites, and perhaps Tim can say more, and looking at the text, the translators have had to decide which one it is that they're going to choose. Shall
I comment on that?
Yes.
Ballantyne, in his wonderful commentary on Job, argues that every time this word barak is used, the reader has to make the decision as to whether to translate it by bless or curse, because there is never any certainty. The context may give you suggestions, but in the end it's a matter of interpretation. And what Jan has said shows us how deeply predisposed theological positions influence our understanding of what Job's wife is saying. And so Ballantyne argues that the phrase could be translated. What she says, Jan has rightly given us one way of interpreting it as a statement rather than as a question. But if you keep it as a question, then it can be translated as bless God even though you may die. Okay, do you want to carry on blessing God? Shall you continue to bless God even though you may die? And that in itself is ambiguous, of course, because it could be a criticism or it could be an act of praise. And then Job's reply, you foolish woman or something, what does he say? You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Now the word foolish is a very strong word in Hebrew, and it indicates complete empty-headedness, really, complete nonsense. And so that could be read as saying, well, that tells you exactly what she did say, was curse God and die. But it could well be read as indicating that Job just was in such suffering that he couldn't receive comfort from his wife. And so, you know, human beings can be like that. They can reject comfort when comfort legitimately is given them. And so that argument may or may not be true. So really, there are so many interpretations which are possible in these two verses that it's really quite stunning. It's one of the most enjoyable things about reading this book, is that you have to enter into these possibilities. In the end, you have to make your decision as to how you think Job's wife's statement here could be interpreted. And you can see from what Jan has said about how in later exegesis, especially in the medieval age when the devil was probably more important than God, how she came to be seen as a devilish figure, which of course tied into the interpretation of Eve as woman as essential temptress to men. And that's really was a very dominating view of women in the medieval period. So later theological interests came to define how she was to be understood.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thank you.
This is not a little bit like English sarcasm. You know, British comedy is full of that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right.
You make the statement that the sort of kind of the tone of the statement and possibly the context makes you realise that you're being very sarcastic.
Yeah, could be read as in that way too. That would be a possibility. And it may be in that tone, Jan's translation as a statement rather than a question could be presented sarcastically or not. So you're quite right, how hearing it aloud could determine how you interpret it. Thank you. Thanks, Roger.
From the point of view of the medieval Christian scholars who took the idea of casting Job's wife as a temptress, a similar role to Eve, in tempting Job to do wrong, does it also imply that death will come immediately by the wrathful hand of God? Or having cursed God, Job should commit suicide? There's that sort of ambiguity there. And as Tim has already said, that Job rebukes her as a foolish woman, almost an immoral woman, empty-headed woman. Job appears to be totally good and willing to accept bad as well as good from God. However, the last phrase is a little ambiguous, did not sin with his lips. And again, you might think, but what of his heart? That's verse 10. Yes, it says it in this Bible here. In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And, well, what did he think? Many former critics of the book of Job believe that these two episodes, plus the concluding prose epilogue, are complete in themselves and stand apart from the so-called dialogue written in poetry, which obviously we'll come on to as we progress in the book. That you've got the beginning and the end, which could, in a sense, almost stand complete in themselves. But what's made this book really, fascinating is the insertion of the poetry and the conversations with the friends. Chapter 2, verse 11, we get the arrival of his friends. And they come from places outside Israel, possibly Edom, and arrive sometime later. They come to show him comfort and sympathy and are shocked by what they find. They sit on the ground beside him in the rubbish for 7 days and 7 nights. Here's the figure 7 again, symbolic. It's also particularly symbolic in the area of mourning because it's the length of time that Joseph mourned for his father Jacob. And they're sitting in silence. And it was also perhaps a habit of the times that if somebody is mourning, they're silent. You don't interrupt them, you just sort of stand alongside them and wait for them to speak first. So these friends are doing all the right things at this stage by just coming and being with Job. Sorry, I'm terribly sorry, Alison, I can't really... Can you come up, Alison?
Speak into the microphone.
Okay. Sorry.
Then I don't have to repeat your question.
I just wanted to say that modern Jews and Judaism, there's a concept of sitting Shiva, S-H-I-V-A. When you're in mourning, sit Shiva for 7 days when everybody, the whole family, arrive and talk about the deceased person. And I just wondered if, I was asking the question really, that if the book of Job was written with a Jewish audience in mind, perhaps the Jewish audience would already know about the idea of sitting Shiva.
I don't know whether that developed later or whether it was right here, but the custom you're talking to may well be based in Job.
Yes, it might come from this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you.
Thank you. And really, I'm drawing to a close here. So one of the main problems of the book, or you might think it's one of the great things about the book, is the tension between the dialogue and the prose narratives that frame them. Prose introductions are not unusual in wisdom writings of the ancient Near East. But what causes the problem in Job is that the way the hero is depicted in the narratives is very different from what emerges from the dialogues and during the dialogues. In the prologue, Job is a model of uprightness, resignation and patience. From this comes the idea of the patience of Job, from James 5:11. But at the beginning of the dialogue, Job explodes suddenly into cursing the day that he was born. Not God, but the day that he was born. And so it's built into this sort of wondering how it's going to be taken further. What more will we learn about Job when he gets into discussion or talk with his friends? So that's as far as I got, Tim.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much.
So
Do you want to stand?
okay, yes. Has anybody got any
questions or comments? Anyone? Yes, Paul.
I was interested in the fact that you said Job is not a Jewish story, or it's maybe a Jewish story, but it doesn't come from a Jewish background. When you said that the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, he uses the term Yahweh. Is that a relationship?
Yes.
But that doesn't fit with my previous understanding that this is a non-Jewish story. Is there some sort of connection underlying this?
Can I perhaps expand on Job's? The whole question of Job's identity is a very complex one. Jan is quite right in what she said, that the land of Uz, or Uz, is possibly in Edom or in Aram or Syria. Nobody really knows, but it almost certainly means that it's outside Israel. It's somewhere, and it's part of the fairy tale, fable quality of this introduction, that it doesn't really matter where it is. It's anywhere, and it's probably outside Israel. But through history, there's been a great contest for the identity of Job. On the one hand, there is the tradition of Job as one of the 7 Gentile prophets, who include all the characters in Job: Zophar, Bildad, Elihu, and who's the one I've left out? Eliphaz. So there's Balaam, the prophet, Job, all of those four people, and somebody else who are in tradition the 7 Gentile prophets who prophesied to Israel before the Torah was given, and who were the sort of... and so there's always been this linkage between the Gentile world and the Jewish world, which has been obscured very often by oppositional politics. But theologically, it's always been there. And so this has strengthened the idea that many Jews are quite comfortable with Job's Gentile origins. There's another person who's key in this debate, and that's Jethro, who who's said to have fled to the Pharaoh's court in the time of Israelite oppression, and to have renounced and to have been responsible for their oppression by being a kind of spy for the Pharaoh. Then he renounced that and rejoined his own community and was forgiven, and therefore he became a model of the Jewish proselyte. Okay? In other words, a Gentile who becomes a Jew, and so Job is also modeled as a proselyte, a Gentile who's become a Jew in that sort of way. But then there are rabbinic writings who question whether Job is in fact a Gentile, and Jan mentioned this, because they connect him with Abraham, and that in fact his ancestry goes back to Abraham, and therefore he is Jewish. And this has been, of course, tied to the politics of Jewish-Gentile relations through the world. At times when those politics were very oppositional, then Jews tended to reclaim the possibilities that there were, that Job's ancestry was in fact related was with Abraham, and therefore that he was a Jew, in fact, by ancestry. So it's a very complex question, and the text doesn't in itself resolve the complexities, but these debates have continued as in rabbinic writings Job has been reflected on through the ages. Any other questions? Yeah. Can you, yeah. Yes. Yes.
But in the history of Israel, it does stipulate that the names of Abraham's family are Amalek. So they actually came from outside.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Jewish people effectively are just the family of Abraham, not the Jewish.
Yes, Judaism, in other words, is not an ethnicity. It's a religion. They are the chosen people whom God chose and are Jews, yes, and characterized by certain religious customs. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, let me just for the tape, as it were, that Abraham himself has named his sons with Ammonite names, which therefore indicates Gentile connections to Abraham, and so followed my observation from that here again we see these interconnections, that essentially being Jewish is not an ethnicity, it's a religion, and that Jews were part of the world, a nation, a people of the world who were gathered into a particular faith characterized by particular customs. Thank you. First, now your other question.
The second question, well, it's a reflection really. These two chapters, chapters 1 and 2, the prose chapters, seem to fit into a piece after Genesis chapter 1. They seem to fit in there. And I'm wondering if one
that Job 1 and 2 fit into between Genesis 1 and 2. Can you just explain that? Because I'm not sure what you're...
Well, it's really to do with the repetition, because it's similar to on the first day, on the second, on the third day,
yes.
and then you have one servant, one uses one, and it kind of fits in with God's creation on one hand, and the destruction on the other hand, hearing Jesus coming and destroying it. It just seems to be that they're kind of two sides of the same story.
Yes, I don't see that it necessarily fits between those two, but the repetition as a storytelling device is a very common storytelling device, which is used constantly by storytellers in all nations. We have it, for example, Jesus using it in the Sermon on the Mount, in the Beatitudes. So it's one of the most common storytelling techniques, which can be used for emphasis, for emotional effect, for all sorts of things. And certainly, you pointed out, and of course it's characteristic of liturgical texts, which the Genesis 1 is a liturgical text, and Genesis 2 is a different text altogether, written by a different writer, which is much more a storytelling, a story of action, whereas Genesis 1 is a priestly writing, which is a liturgical text of worship, characterized, as you've rightly said, by repetition throughout the chapter. Thank you. Yeah. Can you take your mask off, Stella? Thank you.
I find it hard to understand that a loving God can subject Job to quite as many horrors as he does. I know it's to prove a point, but it seems awfully harsh that one person should have to suffer so much just to prove that he would not denounce God.
Well, join the chorus of millions throughout the ages who have been profoundly bothered by this book. I think I told the story last week of an assistant priest I had who just simply couldn't tolerate and who walked out because he had never he'd been taught always just to believe that you don't question God, and particularly when we got to chapter 3, which you'll get to next week, he just couldn't cope with the emotional impact of that chapter, which threw into doubt everything he had been taught throughout his life, and he was an elderly man, throughout his life about God, that God is somebody you just follow and you don't believe. And I remember Martin Lloyd-Jones, whom some of you may know as a very famous preacher in Westminster Chapel in London, a very great preacher in his own way, who was once asked to debate God in the Oxford Debating Union, and who refused, saying God is not a subject for debate. But God is very much a subject for debate in the book of Job. So, you're one of millions.
There's no answer to that. In I recall the patients telling
Okay, the observation is that coming from Archibald MacLeish's retelling of the Job story in his play J.B., that interpreting it as you can only really see God, you can only encounter God through suffering, and that's an interpretation, the way that MacLeish interprets Job, and certainly that is one of the ways to interpret it. Probably more than any other biblical book, this book is susceptible to interpreters. And as Jan has rightly noted, if you are able to engage with the Hebrew text, then the interpretive options widen considerably, because very often in our translations, in some ways, interpretation has been closed down by the way it's been translated by imposed interests. And we'll see that especially when we come to the ending of the book, the very ending of the book, which I'll deal with in the final session. Christine.
I think there is some value, going back to the point that was made earlier about the...
Do you want to come and up here as you're nearby, so I don't have to repeat it?
I was wondering whether there was some value in the point you made about the comparison between the beginning of Genesis and the creation stories. How you get the creation of something perfect, which then goes wrong. And here we've got the story of a man's life, and he's the perfect believing man, but it goes wrong. And the question then is, what makes it go wrong? In the intervention, and I suppose in the Genesis story, what we are told makes it go wrong is that God gives freedom to people to choose how to behave. And in this story, what is it that makes it go wrong? Is it just that, I personally don't read this as God did it to Job, but God allowed that which was the Satan to do it to Job. So in a way, in both cases, God is withholding his hand of control from the situation. I think there's a possibility of a parallel worth thinking of there. So thank you. I would want to thank you for your suggestion.
Thanks, Christine. Thank you. Emma wants to ask Christine a question. Christine, don't go away.
Yes.
So Emma's saying that God suggests it. He does more than allow it. He suggests it.
I see what you mean, that when the Satan says, when God says, have you considered my servant Job, you saying it that he was presenting this as a possible test case. Whereas I had read it as Satan had wandered around the world seeing things, and God is so proud of Job. Have you considered my wonderful servant? I saw it as I've probably read it wrong. I'm sorry. I read as a recommendation. Yes, there are lots of things in the world to see. Look at my servant Job. What a wonderful servant he is, an example. That's how I read it. And then the Satan takes it up. Oh yeah, well I can argue with that one because he's only good. So I see it as God endorsing Job, and then the possibility comes up of the challenge out of that. But I might have read it wrongly.
No, that's absolutely right. God's puffing out his chest and saying, just this absolutely righteous individual, how good he is, and Satan punctures the balloon, or tries to, and the story sets off from that. So that's right. Yeah. Any other? Yes, Eric. Can you take your mask? Please take your mask off if you want to say something. Yes. God is a puppet master. Yes. Ah, well, you see, it's about both of them. So you're absolutely right. Job has free will, and the whole book indicates that. And that's what is so controversial about the book, is that Job exercises his free will to call God his enemy, and to call God, as we'll see later, to actually call God to come into a courtroom before a judge and to be taken to court to account for himself. So the exercise of his free will is precisely one of the very controversial, and there are no answers to the questions you're posing, because they've been posed by readers throughout the ages, that yes, who is this God who plays games with humanity and will cause such terrible suffering just to win a bet? This is a very unpleasant view of God. So that's worried people. Well, yes, okay, yeah. So interpreters all set out to account for these sorts of questions in their interpretation of the book. And some are quite dismissive in the end. I mean, there are interpreters of the book in published commentaries who will argue that Job is just brutally treated by an uncaring God. And there are others, mostly, who will find ways to say something quite different in the end. Legitimately, I think, say that something quite differently. But it's a question that is raised. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Barry, is it? Yeah.
What are we as Christian believers to take away from this for tonight's prayers?
The answer is whatever you like. I think you have to take away that we're at the beginning of a story. Okay? We're at the beginning of a story in which, under the impact of his great suffering at this point in the story, Job maintains his integrity. He maintains his faith. In his suffering, he still maintains his faith. But I think you have to realize that we are at the beginning of a story. We're not at the end of the story. So I think in the end, when we've finished the book, then we can see how we interpret the book in the end. Okay? So that may not be the answer you want, but that's the only answer I can give. Malcolm. Can you lift your flap?
It might not make any better sense with these off. One of the difficulties I have had in looking at Job, reading Job, is the mixed messages that we get from different strands of Christendom. So if you take, say, the charismatic evangelical Christian church, they emphasize God's power is able to move mountains, to raise the Lazarus from the dead. And then the reality is much more nuanced, isn't it? That in fact, God isn't powerful. He doesn't choose to raise people from the dead on a regular basis, as far as I'm aware. And that suffering goes unanswered. And my plea with the church now on is that it actually, before it comes out with wonderful statements that bring people into the church, singing lustily, that they actually consider the whole of it wrong. And I think in many ways, in my early life, from my tradition that I've been through, I have to say that I've been misled, because the balance wasn't right. Giving balanced Christianity is much less attractive than giving a very one-sided Christianity. That Christian leaders and preachers have got to actually take that on board if they're going to have any integrity.
Malcolm is really saying that throughout history the church has tended to oversimplify the complexities of the Bible, and I think that's absolutely right. And that's certainly one of our agendas in the studies that we do, is that we enter into the complexities of each biblical book as well as of their interrelationships to see that we all, and we have to do this, you don't have an hour and a half to preach a sermon these days, so you have to pick and choose certain things, but that indeed we have to understand that things are much more complicated and nuanced actually than often appears in strands of Christianity which emphasize one thing or the other, and that this can detract from the integrity of our faith. And I think that's absolutely true. And that's one of our agendas in these Bible studies, is that we should develop more and more people who engage with the Bible in its complexity and in its richness. Because the biblical books are written by different writers from widely different social backgrounds, and very often with different theologies. And the Bible, it makes no attempt to marry their theologies or to suppress differences. They are there. It's we who tend to suppress the differences in the interests of the particular view that we want to preach and teach and believe in. And you're quite right that tragically the truth is complex, and that's much less attractive than the simplicity of some version of it or other, which is much simplified. I mean, that's the basis today of populism, the political movement of populism, is that certain things, for example, being anti-immigrant is very powerful. And you can pick passages in the Bible which indicate it, and you can preach it, and you can teach it politically, and it's simple. Hate immigrants, very simple. And if people are experiencing a lot of suffering, very powerful. But the complex discourse is less popular than simplified discourse, and that's a danger that we Christians should be aware of. So thanks for that, Malcolm. That's true. Perhaps I can close, because I think we are reaching just about the end, just by Jan mentioned Job's wife. And one of the things that has really bothered interpreters throughout the ages is the fate of Job's wife, the fact that she suffers, in some senses, as badly as he does from loss and from his suffering, and yet she is given no voice. She is silent. She only has 6 words in the Hebrew text, 11 in the New RSV, otherwise she's of no account. And one of the early engagements with her, which tries to present her in a much more sympathetic light, is the Testament of Job, which is a writing in Greek somewhere between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 1st century of the Common Era. And so this is the way the Testament of Job interprets Job, particularly at the end when he speaks to his children about his life. And his wife in the Greek text is called sitis, which comes from the word sititzo, which means to give bread. And he tells them that so he's talking to this new bunch of children he's acquired at the end. That during the 48 years he spent on the dung heap, his wife worked for a rich man as a slave to earn bread to feed her family and Job, and willingly shared her meager portion with Job. Descending ever deeper into poverty, she is induced by Satan, who by the time Testament of Job he has become Satan, who is disguised as a bread merchant to pay for her loaves by cutting her hair as payment, and cutting her hair is a terrible act of public humiliation and disgrace. And Job recounts her devotion, and Sitis laments that speak some word against the Lord and die, then I too shall be freed from weariness that issues from the pain of your body. And Job then replies, so that's chapter 2, verse 9. Job replies much more gently than in the biblical book. in which she's urged to wait patiently for the blessing of the Lord. And so this is Job's reply according to the Testament of Job. So I answered her, look, I have lived 17 years in these plagues, submitting to the worms in my body, and my soul has been depressed by my pains as much as by your statement. Speak some word against the Lord and die. I do indeed suffer these things, and you suffer them too, the loss both of our children and our goods. Do you suggest that we should say something against the Lord and thus be alienated from the truly great wealth? Why have you not remembered those many good things we used to have? If we have received good things from the hand of the Lord, should we not in turn endure evil things? Rather, let us be patient till the Lord in pity shows us mercy. Do you not see the devil standing behind you and unsettling your reason, so that he might deceive me too? So you can see here how the Testament of Job attempts to marry the wife's statement, curse God and die, and Job's response with a much gentler and more understanding attitude on the part of Job, not just dismissive, but taking into account his awareness that she is suffering terribly, and so presenting her in a much more, in a much gentler and more understanding light. That's just very interesting that long before feminism came on the show, interpreters were deeply worried about the way in which Job's wife is treated in the narrative, and so have interpreted it quite differently. And even in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of Job, she is treated in a very much more sympathetic manner as a distraught wife, and emphasizing her own feelings, that she's a distraught wife facing a husband whose body is rotting from the inside out and who's unable then to play his function, which means that effectively he's a loss to the family because he can't do what a man should do, which is care for his family. And so it too, even earlier, about the 3rd century before the Common Era, as the very earliest interpretation of Job, attempts to understand her situation and give her some kind of recognition, which she's not given in the text itself. So things have bothered people, and some of the things, as I've said, that have bothered some of you, and thank you all for your comments and questions, continue to bother people throughout the ages, and there are no answers, I'm afraid to say, and that's the truth. But Jan, thank you so much for a lovely, clear presentation. You can now relax. Next week we'll have Bridget Murray leading us into chapter 3 of the book. And Jan, if you'll send me your paper, and I'll send it out to everyone. So thank you all for being here, for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you so much. Thank you.